Welcome back to Get to Know the CEO. Today I have Mike Ramsey from Compatence with us. Very excited to have him so that we can talk a little bit about how Compatence and Chargeblast works together to help merchants reduce risk, maintain compliant and approve with their payment processors, etc. It's going to be a very good conversation because we have so many overlapping merchants, so we can see from multiple sides of the risk and compliance perspectives, as well as being able to see how merchants can grow successfully and overcome some of these risk and compliance barriers. Before we dive into it, I'm going to give Mike a chance to give a quick introduction so that you guys have a better idea of what Mike does at Compatence and how he could possibly help you guys.
Well, thank you again. And appreciate you having me on today's podcast and just getting to know kind of what you guys do. And obviously it's been evolving since we've worked together the last couple of years now, and great to see your growth. And again, thank you again. But it's my background. So started off, I've always really been in the payment space. So banking services at Wells Fargo. So I kind of climbed that corporate ladder back in the day. I won't say how long I was there because it'll age me a little bit, but at the same point in time, it taught me a lot and got me into the payment space. I ran large teams there and worked on the payments treasury side. And then eventually got an itch to just be more entrepreneurial. So I jumped into a couple different startups, and one was in Europe for a foreign exchange money service business called Transformate Global Payments. So led teams in North America building that out. And then also after that, I pivoted to a company called Reach, which is a very popular online platform for payments for a lot of like online sellers. So really gravitated towards that model, and eventually ended up partnering and founding a company with a business partner that was partnering with Reach. His name is Lars, and he's based in Germany. So he kind of had this thing going in Europe, and then I ended up going into the US and really just building this out. And now we're a team of 10. So our focus is really helping online sellers not only just source like payment processing globally, but we also really kind of work on the risk management side. So that's where we kind of go hand in hand with your team, is that we're prescribing different solutions to really help operationalize, get them to scale, but get them to scale compliantly, right? And do things in a more methodical way versus just kind of pumping the gas, driving a bunch of ads and marketing. But then what we see is the back end kind of goes sideways, right? You get a lot of chargebacks, lack of fulfillment. The CS kind of goes sideways. They're not managing their reviews. So we're really that payment ops manager that does kind of all the boring stuff that a lot of these guys don't like to do. So they can do what they do best, and we handle everything from a payments and operational standpoint.
Got it. Yeah. And something that I love like digging into on these podcasts is like the journey that you've had from, your beginning payments experience to where you are now, just because Chargeblast, my co-founders and we've only been in payments for as long as Chargeblast has been around. So it's not very long, I'll be quite honest, right? But those that have been in payments, they generally have seen the landscape shift quite a bit from when they started to where they are now. So maybe you can provide some insights into how the risk and compliance landscape has shifted during your time in payments and the implications that it may have on merchants.
Yeah, it changed a lot. I've been in financial services for 2 decades. So, I guess I did age myself there. So yeah, it's changed a ton. I try to stay in the gym a few times a week, but yeah, I think it's definitely changed, right? And I think it was funny because I remember Stripe before they were really anything. They were like a 20-person team, and they just had a great set of APIs, easy onboarding. That was kind of where the things went. But I would say, the way that I look at it is there's a major difference between like just domestic processing in the US and then global processing, right? Every country region is significantly different, whether it's from a risk and compliance standpoint, pricing standpoint. But I think right now where things have changed and what you look at is that online selling has just boomed, right? Since let's say 2010. And when COVID hit, that really was another inflection point where, there was a lot of online selling happening because you couldn't really go to a brick and mortar shop. And so with that comes fraud, right? There comes risk. There's just a lot of operational kind of, I would say, just concerns around that, just because a lot of merchants, they can, again, market great, but the operational side of it tends to go to the side. So, I think right now with where things are at, and I just think from like a global perspective, is that it is much harder to get like stable payment processing than it was even 6 months ago or a year ago.
the game was a lot easier to get set up with the likes of a Stripe or Shopify payments or PayPal or whoever it may be. You didn't need certain things to actually get a stable account set up. You didn't need to have like physical presence within certain areas. You can not have an ITIN, for example, if you're a foreigner selling into the US. You were kind of able to hack your way through it in a way and still be successful, right? Like it was a lot of these guys were doing this compliantly. But the problem is the bad actors see this, have the ease of like getting set up. And then that's where fraud happens, right? There's money laundering. There's people that aren't delivering the products. They put up a fake website and they're transacting, getting the money, and then the customer gets hurt. So I think now things have really leveled up to where if you're going to go into a market, you got to make sure that you have a really fluid go-to-market strategy, and you got to make sure that you're aware of the complete compliance requirements. So everybody, I think right now, from a compliance standpoint on the payment side is leveling up, which means that the merchants have to level up. And that's where we kind of provide that expectation, those insights, and let them know. It's not like we're asking for the information. We kind of see it's like, hey, if you're missing this, you're probably going to have problems and you may get an audit or a shutdown because you're missing these things. So a lot of education right now. I think that's where things are really taking play. Then obviously with the VAMP, with the new visa rules and updates, that's another challenge, right? So all of these things are kind of changing real time.
It really does seem like there's more and more barriers for merchants every single year, right? As the government and as the networks try and balance fraud on both sides. But what's really interesting is, this kind of goes back to our own founding story for Chargeblast is, we were a merchant once upon a time. Our focus was always just on growth, growth, growth. You don't really think about the risk and the compliance and the other pieces when you're starting off building a company. And, just this last weekend, it was Black Friday, Cyber Monday. And I think the number of merchants on Stripe that hit their all-time highs or whatever, like 3 or 4x, it was really tremendous. And a lot of it, I think, was just due to net new merchants entering the market, right? But when merchants get set up, their main focus is typically growth. And then I would say like maybe 95% of merchants that come onto Chargeblast, like inbound, set up a call, they have chargeback rates anywhere between 1 to 2 to 3%. So usually too late. What would you say are the best ways? Obviously education is important, but how do you help merchants get ahead of the problem before the problem arises? Because it's way easier fighting, level at a level playing field than if you're fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, for sure. I think with merchants, the education piece is key, but I think the expectation of how you're running your business has to be a little bit leveled to where, the merchant, you have to go slow to go fast, if that makes sense. I think they see somebody, and again, a lot of these influencers I know and work with, and these coaches, right? And so you see that there's this focus on just getting that top end, hitting $1 million a month in sales or whatever, but there's a methodical approach in doing that. So I think from a merchant perspective is that it's okay to go slow to go fast. And what I mean by that is like, just get the operational mechanics in play first, like doing 50,000 in sales a month is great, or 100,000 in sales a month is great. And just make sure that the back end, you're seeing the back end of those sales. What starts to happen is that people will then start initiating chargebacks if the product quality is not good or if the shipping timelines are not desirable, right? So that allows you to tweak things and adjust based on customer feedback. And online reviews are very paramount now for providers when they're setting up a merchant. They look at all the online reviews, whether it's Meta, Trustpilot, anything that is online about a merchant, they're going to really, really look at that to ensure that they're keeping the customer at the center of what they do, essentially. So, I think there's the best piece of advice, I would say, just practical advice, is you got to see a 360 view of your business, not just the sales of the business. You got to look at it and then kind of pressure test, and then start to move up from there. How we get that message out is always, doing things like this and, podcasts, webinars, but it's almost like you kind of have to kind of pump the brakes a little bit in some cases to let them know that, hey, you got to see everything first before you can scale it.
Right. I think the general takeaway is, it's exciting seeing your revenue grow, but you most certainly do not want to get into a position where you might have all those revenues in a reserve because your chargeback rate or your compliance is not up to par. And then you lose all of it if your account gets shut down on Stripe or Shopify or whatever, right? So just being really mindful at the beginning of establishing the merchants like operations is really key for long-term success. Now, in terms of merchants working with combatants, what do you think are like the biggest impacts that combatants have been able to have on your clients? Like, what do you think are some of the things that, if your clients didn't have you guys as their right-hand company when it comes to compliance, payments, etc., what do you think could be missing out on? Or what do you add the greatest value in?
Yeah, I would say there's a few different things here. I think from our side, it's really giving them that like ear to the ground, like compliance kind of focus, right? We're part of the Merchant Risk Council like you guys are, and we're at these different events. And, for me, I'm always looking at like what can go wrong in a merchant's business. It's kind of like you have that compliance kind of ear to the ground and you're focused on trying to stay ahead of that, right? And so for us, it's just giving them that practical insight and advice. And I've kind of hit on a couple of things is when I look at a customer's website, the first thing I'm doing going through the checkout experience, are their shipping times like clearly conveyed? Because that's always going to be like a major chargeback issue, especially if they're drop shipping. So I go through and just from my side of it, look at it from a customer experience standpoint and provide that tangible feedback and kind of let them know it's like, hey, I'm not here to be a bad guy, but I'm here to tell you what the compliance people are looking at different processors and what's going to impact your cash flow potentially with the reserve. So I think that's valuable, right? They get real compliance insights and advice, and it allows them to change their thinking to where it's like, again, you don't have to, 500 grand or $1 million in month 2 or 3. Let's take it back a notch and then make sure that you have proper support. Your CS team is in line. You're answering the reviews. So, I think our value depends on the problem, obviously, but our value just comes from like that real compliance insight and operational, like just guidance at all times.
And I think that's like particularly important in this day and age, especially with things like VAMP. Right? Like VAMP has been around now, it was first introduced last year, but the confusion around it, despite the fact that people have been aware of VAMP for a while now, the confusion around it is still quite high. I was at a MRC conference and the merchants were all like, I don't know how to get my VAMP ratios. And then it was a Visa presenter and she said, well, you can get it from your acquirers. But then the acquirers raised their hands and said, I don't know how to get my VAMP ratio. So despite the fact that VAMP did officially launch, folks still don't know how to get their VAMP ratios. So it is really important to, have someone as a partner, right, who has their ears to the ground, who understands how to overcome some of these problems. Because the merchants are all busy. And we were just talking, there's a bajillion conferences that could be attended, right? And at each conference, there are nuggets of information or value that a lot of merchants may not be able to receive just because they're busy running their businesses, right? So like we do very similar is we always like to keep our ears to the ground and keep our merchants informed so that they're making the best decisions in this evolving landscape that is payments. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to now touch on a little bit about like how Chargeblast and campaigns have kind of engaged together in the past, right? So I feel like there's been a very good synergy. What I've really enjoyed is while Chargeblast really focuses on chargeback prevention and some chargeback recovery as well, we've been able to leverage your guys' expertise and skills when it comes to matchless compliance or finding mids for merchants that may be outside of your typical profile that you see, in a normal risk or medium high risk space, right? So that's been really good for us to engage in. What do you think are some new ways or opportunities for folks in the risk and compliance space to offer their merchants in terms of services, products, and things of that nature?
Yeah, very, if we're looking at this from a risk and compliance perspective, I think one thing is the processor that you select now, you really have to make sure that they're providing the data to you around TC40s and obviously with the new VAMP ratios in a very simple way, I guess is clearly stated. And, for me looking at it, it's ensuring that the merchants are actually working with a partner that A, knows what they're doing, that B, that it serves their vertical and their niche or whatever they're selling or market. And then the reporting, right? They have to be able to kind of take control of their processing relationship, and they just need to be empowered and educated, right? And I think that's where I see the biggest gap with just payment processing in general. Like we've carved out like very curated payment processing relationships that are just focused for online sellers only. Usually none of our merchants have a brick and mortar presence. It's all online. They understand who we are, what we do. So when our customers come to us, it's a very easy setup for them because the partners know what we do, right? So I think that's pretty paramount in my opinion. Like a lot of merchants get told from like processors that, oh yeah, we can do it. Then like 95% of their portfolio is retail, but then they like serve like a very small fraction of online sellers, right? So I think that's where on the industry side, I think we can be better. Just be more transparent with your merchant. Like if you're not like, I tell my merchants all the time, I don't do retail. I just don't. That's just not, I could, but I really kind of niche down. And I think that's where overall, just being more transparent with our merchants and think of your merchant as your partner and the merchant going back to the processor, like that's their partner. So I think that's what we can do and provide it. I think that answers the question there, but yeah, just having just more tools and resources, like empower the merchants and educate.
Right. Yeah. I think information is so key, right? Like in this day and age, if you can't get your TC40 data, you're not going to understand your VAMP ratios. And more importantly, right, since Visa is actually monitoring the acquirers, you need to know your processor's VAMP ratio. It's not just your own VAMP ratio. You know, what's funny is I've been telling my more high risk clients, hey, look, you could probably be a little bit safer if you're actually on Stripe or Shopify. I don't know if you've done this with your high risk clients, but I have started doing so just because Stripe and Shopify does so much volume, their VAMP ratios are quite low. From what I understand, Stripe's VAMP ratio is like sub 10 basis points because they just do so much volume. If you're a high-risk processor on a traditional high-risk acquirer, that acquirer might be feeling more of a squeeze when it comes to VAMP ratios, right? So not only understanding that acquire VAMP ratio and your own VAMP ratio, right? It's the combination of the two. So I think that's somewhere where we could work pretty closely on, since you guys are, not only do you guys do just compliance, you also help set up mids, find mids, et cetera, right? So understanding VAMP ratios from a merchant, but also from like an acquirer perspective is super, super important. And then in terms of something I noticed that I'm sure you've noticed with your clients as well is a lot of our clients, they're almost like semi-chargeback, semi-compliance experts. They spend a lot of time trying to figure out this part of the business, even though it's not a revenue generator, right? It's not a revenue generator. It's not even a profit generator. Sometimes it's a profit loss, but they spend so much time focusing on this part of the business because it's so important. And of course, we do our best to try and mitigate that for them and try and step in and keep them informed, et cetera. What are your opinions on how to best reduce this time investment for merchants so that they don't need to be so involved? I think that's one of the pain points that our merchants see is even with our services, they still got to keep in mind like their refund rates and their auth rates and, you know, outside of, because everything's tied together. So how do we let merchants be merchants and get our products better so that the payments and compliance can just kind of run on its own?
That's a good question. I guess that's what we build our business for. That's definitely something that we offered it to kind of offload there. You got to look at your ROI, I would say, right? I think having some type of knowledge around payments and chargeback management is key because it kind of tells you, I shouldn't say kind of, it gives you deep insights of your business, right? So if we peel the onion back of a chargeback, what is the root cause and why is the chargeback being filed? Right. So that'll tell you whether you have a problem on fulfillment, product quality, non-clear billing descriptors. Maybe you have subscriptions. A lot of merchants right now are just auto opting people into subscriptions, right? And then they get a box 30 days later and they're like, I didn't know I paid for this. So I think it's a delicate balance. I think the merchant should be educated, right? Because it will tell them about their business. But I think there's also a point where it doesn't make sense to have somebody doing this for part-time. And then again, whether it's somebody like our consultancy or having a VA, because auth rate analysis and fee analysis, those are things that should be reviewed every month, right? To see where the performance is at, because if your auth rates are low, then your conversions are going to be low. So it's tricky, right? Like you want to obviously save time, focus on what you do best, but you should know enough to be dangerous with it. And then also to help improve your overall business, because it's going to tell you things and give you indicators on your overall business performance and where the leaks are, right? So there's a balance here on that.
Do you guys help merchants do like auth rate analysis and things of that nature? Off the top of my head, we have a very large merchant who has a large question about why their auth rates are going down for their Apple Pay. Me, I have X number of hours during the day where I need to spread out a lot of my focus, right? So it's really hard for me to focus on answering these questions for these merchants. But like, is that something that you guys do when it comes to analysis?
Yeah, well, we definitely do that. A lot of our larger merchants are looking at the auth rates with a fine tooth comb. So we'll go through the decline reason codes, bin mapping. We'll kind of go through everything to ensure that it's really, really sound, I would say. And then also, decline routing. So if one declines and it's routed to the next provider, it all depends on the setup and how they're moving things through. And then again, the regions they're selling into as well. So yeah, we'll kind of go through the exercise with them together, and we really try to show them how to do it, right? So we'll put together the formatting and then educate them. And usually once we do that, then they're able to kind of keep and maintain that over the course of time. It just depends how many accounts that they have, right? If it's a pretty laborious process, they may just offload it to us entirely.
Oh, that's great to know. I mean, then I got a great introduction for you right after this call. Sweet. So now in terms of competence and what you guys have set for the future, what would you say is like the thing that you're most excited about for your guys' next 1 to 5 years? Like, where do you guys see competence, and what offerings will you guys have, and how do you continue adding value to your clients?
Yeah, I think this is definitely our biggest question going into next year. And we've already kind of built our own platform now where it's really just our customer dashboard. So, and I think you alluded to this in the beginning, we don't want the merchants to have to do everything. So we're trying to build automation, and we have AI tools that we've kind of patched together through this group that we're a part of. It's really cool seeing it. But essentially it's going to be like having me on your side without me physically being there within our dashboard. So we have some different AI tools where you can well, essentially, yeah, AI, Mike, or Lars, take your pick. So yeah, we've kind of curated this AI tool within our customer portal, and we're kind of in a beta phase right now, just pressure testing it with a few customers. But that's what we want to do. There's only so many of us to go around in our consultancy, but if we're able to put this in a more automated way, and I think what we're trying to do is we want to be proactive versus reactive, right? Because reactive is like, I got funds stuck somewhere, or my payment processing got shut down, Mike, help me, right? That's usually what our call to action is. But we also are trying to put it to where the data is being fed into our portal real time, and it's going to trigger if something is like sets off a false alarm, right? So if their chargebacks start to spike a little bit, hey, what's going on? And these are the reason codes that we're seeing. So everything's going to be integrated to where we're trying to be preventative as possible on this and proactive in terms of giving customer like real solutions and like insights to be able to action things if things start to go off the rails. So we're moving a lot more into a software company versus just a consultancy moving into next year.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Like, something that's been really hot actually in payments that we've seen is like information-based software solutions that are basically like payments analysts that you can onboard, be very comfortable with in terms of the data that is being fed in, and then you preemptively flag, hey, here's something that's impacting your auth rates. What's interesting about this is I actually did an auth rate analysis for one of our clients. I fed their spreadsheet into Claude, and I asked Claude to do it. And it did a pretty good job. It wasn't great, but it got like 30-40% of the way there. It understood what auth rates meant, it understood decline reason codes, etc. All the stuff that gathers from the internet. It didn't do a great job understanding the exact analysis, but I didn't train it or anything. It was just a blank Claude, like, hey, yeah, here's a spreadsheet. Help me figure this out. So it's really exciting to see what's possible with AI moving forward in the future. It's a little disappointing on our side when it comes to chargebacks. So we do use AI for representment, but because we're in the data flow for the networks, right, there's a little bit less of AI usage when it comes to preventing chargebacks, because we're literally just getting real-time data. But when it comes to representments, we do rely on AI, and We train on a bunch of we train our AI on a bunch of Visa, MasterCard guidelines for merchants fighting disputes, etc. And that's been really impactful. So yeah, AI for sure has a big role in the payment space, and very exciting to hear that you guys are getting into it. With that said, any last words that you want to leave with our merchants or anything you want to flag that they should be aware of in this coming new year?
I think, in terms of looking at it going into next year, I think just the expectation things are going to get harder, but I think it's actually better for the ecosystem. It's really going to require everyone to level up in just all aspects of their business. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing per se. I think you just need to have that awareness around what certain things mean within the VAMP ratios, TC40s, pulling that data, understanding how that ties to your business, right? Just from an operational perspective, I think that is very key. And I think as a merchant, you need to figure it out, right? And so that's something that obviously we can help provide, and obviously with your team as well, and just trying to get everybody to level up, I guess, is the best way to explain it. And things are going to get harder. And, I just think from that perspective, it's not a bad thing. It's just something you just have to adapt and get used to. And most of the people that have kind of worked through this exercise with me over the last 3 months, they enjoy it. They really like to understand it. Like, oh, this makes sense. You see the light bulb, it kind of clicks, and then you see them, they're pretty smooth sailing after that. Yeah, things will pop up here and there, but I think once you're able to really kind of wrap your hands around this thing and really understand the payments and operations side, it just puts you at so much more ease now moving forward versus you just don't know.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned just now, actually, things are only going to get harder. And we were just talking about AI. AI e-commerce now is coming in. You got AI shopping. God knows what they're going to buy. They might just go completely off the rails and just buy me a bunch of random stuff that I don't want. Maybe. Who knows? So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's AI can be used in good and bad ways, but also just going to get more and more complicated. So, having partners on your side that really understand, like merchants having partners that really understand what's going on in the space, regulations that are changing, et cetera, is so key in 2026, 2027 moving forward. But all right, well, appreciate the time, Mike. I hope everyone here enjoyed learning a little bit about my competence as well as some important changes in the industry. I'm sure we'll see each other at upcoming conferences and host some events together. There's plenty of us to do together. So very excited about that. Thanks again for the time.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it.